Welcome back to ZOO3649. This is lecture 12, continuing with sexual selection. So, we want to unpack what I told you in the last lecture about sexual selection. And so, we want to, we are most interested in this loggerheads conflict between natural selection and sexual selection. Remember, natural selection, you look perfectly suited to the environment. Sexual selection, you don't look perfectly suited. You look like you stand out from the environment, right? That's why they're always at loggerheads, and we're going to unpack this briefly. All right, and guys, you will be asked in tests and an exam to talk about this hypothesis. Okay, one of these two hypotheses that I'm going to tell you about today, and you need to unpack it. Okay, so if you're not understanding, you're going to fail this question. I'm warning you, there's a question coming about this. All right, so let's look at Ronald Fisher's hypothesis. Ron Fisher, if you've not heard the name before, was a very, very, very famous biologist. And he was one of the first biologists. Well, you see, he liked maths. Okay? And as a, as a general standard, biologists, they don't like maths much. Okay? Even me, I don't like maths much. But unfortunately for everybody, biology is a science. And so it needs maths. Okay? Without maths, forget about being a scientist. That is why you need to have matric maths to get into a BSc program. Because if you can't do maths, science is out of the question for you. Right, so Ron Fisher was a rare guy. Because in 1920, 1930, when he was a young man, like as you see in this picture, he was a mathematics guy. He was very clever. He was great in numbers. So he tried to bring biology and maths together. He was one of the guys who was really instrumental in bringing mathematics into biology. Remember in the days of Darwin, it was just ideas, right? Talking about natural selection, sexual, and so on, right? But how do we test these ideas? How do we model these ideas? We have to have maths. And Ron Fisher was one of the first guys to start using maths in biology to test hypotheses. So he came up with, and he's extremely clever, right? So he came up with, he conceptualized this loggerheads, this fight between natural selection and sexual selection in his head. He conceptualized it, and he wanted to unpack it more. Okay, and so he came up with this runaway hypothesis. And guys, we need to understand this hypothesis. It's very important to understand this hypothesis. You'll be examined on it. So, what is this runaway hypothesis? So, in his runaway hypothesis, Fisher states that, okay, mate's choice could not have actually developed unless it actually was the trait that is being chosen used to have a survival advantage. Hear that? Hear that? What am I saying there? What is he saying there? He's saying that you cannot have a trait that is not involved in natural selection, in sexual selection. That sounds a bit strange to start off with, but originally the trait had to have been selected by natural selection in order to enable the organism to survive the struggle for survival, not reproduction at the moment, right? But somehow that very same trait became involved in sexual selection as well. Okay? So the selection for the trait was there during natural selection, but it actually once the female preference for a certain color of that trait or so, like a red feathers instead of brown feathers, right? So the feathers were selected because you need the feathers to survive as a bird, right? But now it gets hijacked by female's preference. The female now looks at that very trait feathers, but now starts selecting not based on is it allowing me to fly. It's based on what? Is it attractive or not, right? So the female preference evolves from on the trait that already has natural selection on it. This is an important starting point, right? Can't just come on a trait that doesn't have natural selection. Natural selection must already be operating on a particular trait before female preference to hijack it and start using that trait and preferring other kinds of sub-traits there. Let me just turn off my speaker so that those notifications don't annoy you. Okay, right. So once the female preference evolves, any genes that confer the survival advantage but compromised attractiveness would not be passed on. Why? So look at this. Once the gene or the trait gets hijacked for sexual selection by female preference, the alleles that allowed the male to survive but remain ugly, those alleles, genes, they're not getting passed on anymore. Which genes are getting passed on? Only the genes that give the males, make the males attractive. Okay. So suddenly, although natural selection was involved on a trait, selecting a trait to help the organism survive, as soon as the female hijacks that trait and uses it for sex, for attractiveness, suddenly who puts his genes to the next generation is not the same person, the same individual who is surviving the struggle. You can survive the struggle, but if you're ugly, you will never have a high fitness, right? So you must survive the struggle and you must be beautiful in order for your genes to be passed on, okay? So that means what? Only the most attractive are passing their genes on. Suddenly, the alleles that confer the survival advantage but compromise attractiveness. In other words, if there's a gene that makes you survive but also makes you ugly, that gene is not going to go to the next generation. Okay? So all those genes that could have had a survival advantage, a lot of them are not being passed on thanks to sexual selection, right? And then you see now, the genes that are passed on by natural selection are not the same genes that are passed on by sexual selection. So they are coming into competition with each other, loggerheads again. Great. Okay. So, and we will unpack both of these hypotheses. The second hypothesis is Zahavi's handicap hypothesis. So this is Ahmad Zahavi, okay? Also a very, very famous biologist. And he came up with the handicap hypothesis, which is different to the runaway hypothesis. Both hypotheses are for male ornament, so sexual selection. So Zahavi said, the males that are most beautiful, the most extravagant, the ones with the reddest color, the most stand out, those traits, in order to evolve them, you need to be pretty healthy. Okay? So, in other words, the trait itself comes at a cost to you. You need to understand this, guys. To be beautiful comes at a cost, in other words, right? So what is that cost? The cost is like this, guys. It's costly in terms of energy to survive and make it to adulthood, right? You have to survive the struggle. You have to use up a lot of energy, but you survived, right? So on top of that energy that you needed to survive, you now need much more energy. Why? To make the red color red or the blue color blue, right? That also requires energy, guys. It doesn't just come out of heaven from nothing. It requires energy. So a male that has beautiful red color, the bright, bright, bright red color, that male is telling the female what? This is the point, guys. That male is telling the female that look at me, look at my red color. Not only am I good enough to survive the struggle for existence, I have also remaining energy to make my red color so beautiful. That is what Zahavi called an honest signal. Okay? An honest signal. And so basically, this honest signal is telling the female that my genes are good. You can take me as a mate. My genes are good. If I have this beautiful red color, and it's the brightest color more than any of the other males, it is telling you, my dear female, that I don't only have energy to survive the struggle, I have more energy than everybody else because my colors are the brightest. You must select me so that your kids can get my good genes. You see why the female chooses the most attractive male? Because she is responding to what Zahavi called an honest signal of quality. Okay? An honest signal. What is a dishonest signal of quality compared to Zahavi's honest signal? I can tell you what a good dishonest signal of quality is, of genetic quality. It's when an ugly man who gets rich buys a Ferrari. That is not an honest signal of your genes, is it? No. No. Because your genes are making you ugly. Right? That is not, your genes are giving the honest signal that you are ugly. That is the honest signal. You bought a Ferrari with money, maybe you stole the money. Now you have a Ferrari. And the female is reacting to what? Your Ferrari, not you. You're the Ferrari. So, are you saying to the female, look at my Ferrari, your kids need to have my genes. So, does that mean if you mate with that one, as a female, your kids will also have a Ferrari? No, it doesn't. It means that your kids will be as beautiful as that man. Not that they will get a Ferrari. A Ferrari is a dishonest signal. Okay? Because it doesn't mean that he's got good genes enough. He could have stolen the money to buy the Ferrari. Okay? Doesn't mean that he's brilliant, that he was working hard and he got the Ferrari. No, it doesn't mean that. It's not an honest signal. Whereas an honest signal is when a male is in good condition and he's looking bright. He can't lie. A bird can't lie and buy a Ferrari or buy a red color. He can't cheat the system the way a human can cheat the system, right? The bird needs real energy. He needs real good genes in order to be beautiful. Okay, that's why we call it an honest signal. Okay, so only the males in good condition with the good genes will be able to develop the most beautiful ornament. Okay, and maintain that ornament. All right, so let's unpack Fisher's model first. This is and there will, as I said, there'll be questions asked about this in tests and exam. And I know that most of you are going to try to by heart this picture and simply draw this picture with exactly everything here, memorized and drawn. You will get 0. I promise you, you will get 0. Because this is not a test of memorization. This is a test of what's upstairs, what you're taking in. If you don't understand, you must fail and try again next year. No other choice for you. You wanted to do biology? It's hard. Right. So, and if you try to just simply copy this, and I will fail you for this question if you do that, because I've now warned you. Now, look at this picture. This is a brilliant picture, okay? Because it's telling us so many things. Let's look firstly at the birds, okay? First, these are all male birds, okay? There's no female here, right? These are all males. What do you notice about these birds? Obvious, right? The tail length. Look at the end here, the tail is longest. Look at the end here, the tail is shortest, right? And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger with each bird. Okay? This is a scale of the different phenotypes, the different shapes that the female can choose. Remember, the female bird looks like which one? It looks like this one here with the short tail, right? Females don't have the long tail. It's only the males that have this long tail. Now, when you look at this, right? When you look at this, if you were a female choosing and you choose based on the tail, which one will you choose? Obviously, you're always going to go for the one with the longest, right? So, basically, from about here, this length of tail from here to here is what you're going to choose as a female, okay? If you will not choose these guys here, because why? Those ones, the tail is not long enough. You want an honest signal. Then the honest signal is saying, look, I have a long tail, right? I can and I'm beautiful because I have a long tail. And so if you mate with me, your kids will also have a long tail, right? So that is what it's the male is trying to signal to the female. So the female is only going to go for the ones with a certain length of tail and above. If you are a female, there is where you are selecting. Okay? Your female choice is from here to here, okay? With these males only. You're not going to choose these guys here as a female because they're not attractive. Their tails are too short, okay? Now that's female choice. Let's take a step back and said, before these males were adults and females could choose them, they were kids. They were babies as well. They had to survive the natural elements until they got to adulthood. Natural selection, right? And to survive to adulthood, what do they need to be? What do they need to be? How do they need to look to survive natural selection? That is a very different question to how do they look if they have to survive through sexual selection. Sexual selection, we've already told you. Here, the females are only choosing these guys with the longer tails. These guys are never going to get chosen. But what about for natural selection? Who was clever here in this class? Who are going to be chosen by nature? The ones who are best able to escape from the predator, right, are the ones that natural selection will survive, will promote to the next generation. And that is these guys here, right? Mainly these guys. And as the tail gets longer and longer and longer, what happens? You are able to escape less easily. The longer your tail is, the more chance what? A predator is going to grab you. You will not be able to escape. So as your tail gets longer, what happens to your fitness due to natural selection? Look at here. Here it is. Graphed here. You see my mouse where I'm moving here's tail length. Here's a short tail on this side. Here's the long tail. And here is our measurement of natural selection called fitness. So what's going on here. See this green line here? The green line, okay? The green line is telling you what your fitness is due to natural selection. Okay? So you see here, it's increasing. So your fitness, as your tail gets to a certain length, right, your fitness increases. But at a certain time, your tail becomes what? It becomes too long. And you are unable to fly fast. You are more likely to get caught by a predator and eaten. Right? So, that's why as the tail becomes longer, what happens to this green graph here? Curve. It gets lower and lower and lower. And a certain point here, you see where my mouse is right there. You see how long the tail is there. At this tail length here and above, natural selection will always nail you. Look at the fitness, how due to natural selection. Why is this fitness going down here for these long-tailed birds? Because natural selection, predator is going to eat all of them. They are not going to be able to escape. The tail is too long. Okay? That's why their fitness is going down. So these guys with the long tail, due to natural selection, they have a low fitness. The longest one here, look how low his fitness is here. Low fitness. He has the same fitness as who? The guy with the short tail. Why? The shortest tail. Why? Because this guy's fitness is getting less here because his tail is too long. And what happens? The predator is going to grab you. Okay? So, that is the natural selection. Now, let's look at sexual selection. Sexual selection is, as you guessed it, right? It's the red one, right? So, no, sorry. It's not the red one. It's the red one. The red one is this fitness plus sexual selection. Okay? So, look at this, the red one. Red one is going up. It doesn't actually stop. It goes and goes and goes and goes. So basically, here, you can actually have a low survival fitness. But what? But because you have a long tail, even though your chance of survival is low, if you are surviving, the female will choose you because you have the longest tail. Okay? So here, yeah, is where you get the runaway part, where the total male fitness and this part of the curve is very high because sexual selection is making it high. Natural selection is not making it high. The females choosing the guys with longest tails, see here where I have my mouse, they're the ones making this curve keep going up for the guys with the long tails here on this side of the graph. Look how high their fitness is here. Why? It's not because of natural selection. It's because of sexual selection. The females are making sure that these guys, their genes are getting passed to the next generation. Okay? So, what would actually happen now because of this model? The name of the model tells you what will happen. You will have a runaway effect. What does that mean? Basically, because even though natural selection fitness is going down, you have such a huge advantage because the female will select you, that your total fitness is going still high if you have a long tail. And that is telling you what? The next generation, most of the birds are going to have long tails. The ones with short tails are going to get less and less and less. And the ones with the long tails are going to get what? More and more and more, because they, despite having low natural selection fitness here, they have still a very high sexual selection fitness. Higher is making up for the loss of natural selection fitness. Look at this curve. It keeps going up. So, that is telling you that in this situation, you will have the phenotype running away. The tails will just get longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer, right? It will run away. That is what Fisher means by the runaway model. Because the total fitness is still so high for these guys here, for that very reason, you are going to, it will just, and all the females are choosing these males. That's why their total fitness is so high. And therefore, in the next generation, you're going to have many more of these guys compared to these guys. And so the population is going to run away with that long tail. Okay, you get what it means now with this runaway model? If the females, if you had to say, have the best of both worlds, you will find a place where natural selection and sexual selection come into loggerheads, but one does not dominate over the other, where both are in balance. With this runaway model, what is happening? Natural selection is coming, sexual selection is coming, they are at loggerheads. And what's happening with the runaway model? Sexual selection is dominating over natural selection and running away, pushing the phenotype to a longer and longer and longer and longer and longer tail. It's dominating over natural selection. And that is what happens in the runaway model. Sexual selection dominates over natural selection. Okay? And so what will you get? You will get a runaway in the population. The trait will become more and more and more and more, bigger, 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 or longer and longer and longer, or redder and redder and redder, depending on what is the trait being selected. All right, so that is what we mean by runaway. If you had to have a balanced model, not a runaway like this one, but a balanced model, where the two sexual and natural selection are in balance between each other. So you have sexual selection, but not at the cost of natural selection. Okay? In the real world, what will happen? Where will that balance be? Who's the clever one in this module? Where is that balance going to be? That's right. It will be right here. This guy is circled. This is the optimal length for tail survival. So if you have this tail length, you actually survive the best. The ones who are too short, maybe they don't survive very well. The ones that are too long, you know they don't survive very well. So the optimal length is this one here. This is the place where natural selection is where? At its highest. And then fitness due to natural selection is at its highest. Here. As soon as the fitness starts getting lower, it's not an optimal length anymore. Okay? So here is if you had to have an equilibrium, a balance between natural and sexual selection, it will be there at that place where that optimal length is. If you don't have a balance, a sexual selection is going to dominate over natural selection, then you will have what Fisher called a runaway effect, this runaway effect. Okay? You need to understand this. Another demonstration of this runaway effect is in fish, and when you give it natural selection and when you give it sexual selection. Okay? So if you put fish in a tank and do this experiment, let's look at the experiment here on the left. What has happened? Okay? You put fish, there are two kinds of fish. There are fish with, you see here, the big patches, right? And then there are these fish with the small patches, it's small little dots. Big dots or patches and small dots. They are different in trait, okay? Now, if you, in one fish tank, you have the bottom of the fish tank full of big, black, patchy rocks, yeah? Who is going to blend in here? Obviously the one with the big patches, right? They will blend in more than the the one with these small dots, right? And here you see there's a predator, a big fish who eats these fish. So who is this predator going to select here? If you conduct this experiment here over 15 generations, whoever does not get eaten, you take them, you do the experiment again. Whoever does not get eaten, you take them, you do the experiment again. After 15 times, what will you see? You will see this. Because why? The predator has selected who? The guys that don't blend in, right? He's selected the ones with the small dots here. There's no more fish with small dots after 15 generations because why? This predator has eaten them all. This is what you call natural selection, right? When the organism is perfectly suited to the environment. Look at the second experiment, the opposite one. What have they done here? They've kept a predator, they've kept the same fish, but what? They've changed the background. The background now, the soil at the bottom of the fish tank is what? It's very fine. It's not patchy, right? You see that? So now, what's going to happen? After 15 generations with the predator, all the fish are going to be small dots because they blend into this environment. Those ones with patchy are not there anymore. They've all been eaten by this predator. Again, it's natural selection, right? And both these experiments show you very clearly how natural selection can make an organism perfectly suited to its environment. Mr. Darwin's beautiful idea, first idea. The second one. Now let's look at the ones on our on our right. This is not natural selection, right? Why is there no natural selection in this set of experiments? What do you notice different compared to this one? Ah, right, the clever ones. There's no predator. See this predator here in all these experiments? He's not here. There's no predator here. So you do the very same experiment. Okay, you do the very same experiment. You start off with different colors of different kinds of fish, like we did here, and different backgrounds. And you do exactly the same experiment. After 15 generations, what do you get? You don't get the same as you do in the natural experiment with the predator. In the sexual selection, who do you find after 15 generations? And why? You find on the ground with the big patchy rocks, you don't find the big patchy fish that blend in. You don't. Instead, you find the opposite ones. You find the ones with the fine spots. Why? And on the other side, look at this. You find if you have the ground very fine and not patchy, who do you find living there after 15 generations of sexual selection? You don't find the ones that are fine, have a fine color. No, you find the ones that have a patchy color. Why? Because in this experiment here where my mouse is, the ones that had a fine color, they were not seen by the females. They blended in. They didn't stand out. So what? The female didn't choose them to mate. The female only chose the one that was, wow, standing out, attractive. Né? And therefore, they only chose the males that stood out with this patchy against the fine environment, or the opposite, the males that are fine against a patchy environment. You see, it is done the opposite of what natural selection would do. You see that? That's why you have this always loggerheads between natural selection and sexual selection, trying to find a balance with each other. And in cases where you remove natural selection completely, you have this runaway effect of fishes. This population has run away. It's run away. Why? Because here, all the males, all the fish are standing out from the background. They're all, because females only chose the ones who stood out. After 15 generations now, you only have the ones that are standing out, right? What will happen if we take this tank and put this predator back in here? What's going to happen? This population has been running away. These two populations have been running away with sexual selection. Because why? We allowed sexual selection to overpower natural selection. Look, these populations, they've run away. They are not perfectly suited to their environment anymore. They have run away. Look at that. As Fisher would say, they have run away. What will happen if we take this predator and put them into these two tanks? You can be sure what will happen, right? Natural selection will kick in again, and they will have to find a balance again. That optimal in the bird, that would be the optimal. If you bring a predator back here, what's going to happen? All these guys are going to be standing out and they're going to get eaten. They're all going to get eaten. Maybe there will not even be one fish left here. Why? Because this population here has run away with sexual selection. And once it's run away, once natural selection becomes stronger, everyone's going to die. Everyone who looks like that is going to die. Okay? And that is Fisher's runaway model. Okay, let's go briefly now and talk about Zahavi's handicap model. Okay? Now remember when I was talking about honest signal. Okay? This bright color here of this male, it is an honest signal of immunocompetence and resistance to parasite disease. Okay? That is because experimenters looked at the immune system genes in these birds and compared them to the immune system genes in males that did not look beautiful. And they have different genes. So actually, when the female chooses the beautiful male, she's actually choosing the genes that he has for her kids. She's choosing his genes because the genes is what makes that phenotype, right? So basically, if you have this beautiful bright red here, you are saying to this female, look at me. Not only am I good enough to survive the struggle, I have enough energy to survive the struggle into adulthood. But now I have also enough energy to produce this beautiful red color more than any of the others. You go and look at the others' red color, they are not as good as mine. Because why? My genes, my energy was highest in making this red color. I have so much left over. After I've survived, I still have so much left over to make this color, you see? You have to choose me. Okay? It's an honest signal. Okay? And now, why is this different to a dishonest signal, like buying a Ferrari and saying, look at me, I'm so attractive, I have a Ferrari. You are not attractive. The car is attractive. It's a dishonest signal because the Ferrari is not coded in your genes. It's a dishonest signal. Okay? And that's what blessers do in our societies. Yeah? They give dishonest signal. Ferrari, money, those kinds of things. Those are not coded in their genes, and if you mate with them, you're not going to get those things. Even humans have to think about sexual selection. So look at this. This is another beautiful example. This long-tailed wide-eye here. You see it here? Actually, this is a magpie. But you see this? Look at this long tail. It's expensive, right? This one is, if it's too long, I'm going to get caught by a predator. It's costly. It costs. When I fly, you imagine the bird had a small tail. When you are flying, how much energy are you using? If your tail is small, you don't use much energy. You can fly nicely. But when your tail is big, we've all seen these birds with long tail. Paradise flycatchers, long-tailed white-eyes, flying around our campus at Univen. Have you seen those males flying compared to a female? They struggle. They're trying, but they are moving slowly. Because why? They have a long tail, that's why. So the male with a long tail, why do you think the female is attracted to the long tail? Maybe because the long tail is beautiful, but the main reason is the female can see, Aish, this one, he has a long tail. That means he has enough energy to survive the struggle. He has more energy to make a long tail. And imagine, he has even more energy to fly around with this long tail, carrying this heavy long tail behind him. I'm going to choose him because I want my kids to be strong like him. Okay, so you see why a long tail is an honest signal. Okay, it's not the same as a Ferrari or money that you have stolen and you are blessing someone. That's a dishonest signal. Now I come lastly to asymmetry. Okay, what is asymmetry, guys? It's something that Zahavi picked up on. And it's one way that females are able to determine whether your genes are good or not. Remember, this honest signals here for the long tail and the beautiful color, it's an honest signal of what? I have a lot of energy, I've got good genes. Take me. If you are asymmetrical, so I've probably not given a great example of asymmetry here, but you see this deer. What does asymmetry means, right? It means that if we humans, animals, etc., we are bilaterally symmetrical, right? That means if you take a knife and cut us in half here, this half looks the same as this, more or less the same as this half, right? So you can figure this out if you put a mirror. You know, if you put a mirror here and you look, you should be able to see one half reflected on the other half. You should look pretty similar to what you do. But if you are not symmetrical, say, for example, one ear is much bigger than the other ear. Zahavi said that this is called asymmetry. It's not symmetrical. And it is telling the female that you have some, while you were developing, when you were in your mom's stomach developing, right? One ear became bigger and one ear was smaller. Something is wrong with this one's development. That is what it is telling to the female. The female is looking at one big ear, one small ear, thinking, I don't want this one. Why? Because usually when you are asymmetrical, it implies that there are some bad genes inside you that are making you asymmetrical. Okay? Not always, but that is what. And so just think about it for yourself. If you're a girl and you are now looking at a guy and one guy has a small ear and one has a big ear like this, you know, in one guy, 2 ears, but one is small, one's big. Come on, it's not attractive. You're not going to go for that one, right? So you see, we humans, we also are bound by this asymmetry bad genes law. Okay, we're not exceptional. We're just like the animals. We see the same things and we register in our brains the same way. Okay, so symmetry in some species is looked at, and humans are one of those species that looks at symmetry. If the two halves of your body are not quite, if one stands out more than the other, immediately you're turned off. Nah? You're like, I don't find it attractive. Nah? And that's because in some species, these asymmetries are saying to the female, Aish, when this one was a baby and developing in its mother's stomach, it didn't have certain genes that allowed everything to develop at the same size. You see, one is bigger than the other. There was a problem there while it was developing. So I don't want my kids to have those problems. No, I'm not going to choose this one. Okay, so asymmetry is an honest signal of bad genes. Okay, so while, you know, a long tail, a beautiful color in males is an honest signal of good genes, asymmetry, if you're not the same on both halves of your body, is an honest signal for bad genes. Okay, and that's where I will leave these two hypotheses, and I will see you guys for the next lecture, which will be on evidence for sexual selection. Just a note about this lecture, the next lecture lecture 13, it comes with a paper. The paper is at your Blackboard site. You must read that paper before you watch lecture 13. Otherwise, you're going to be lost. Okay? Read the paper, go over it tonight, and tomorrow watch this lecture 13, and then have the paper beside you, and then you will see how I unpack the paper. If you don't read the paper first, you're playing with us. You're playing with us. You will probably see you next year in the same module. Cheers.